Hello, hello, and welcome back. This is part 2 of our Buttercups tutorial. In part 1, we started painting these buttercups together utilizing a whole bunch of different watercolor techniques. And in this class, we will be finishing up this painting here and continuing to learn about layering, different watercolor techniques, and doing it in a very beginner-friendly and welcoming way. So if you joined us for part 1, you're here for part 2, fantastic. If you are wanting to look for part 1, make sure you check out the part 1 tutorial. I'll link it down below in this video. And for those of you who are new here, welcome. And my name is Isa Down. I'm an artist and illustrator at the base of the Rocky Mountains. Being a self-taught artist, I love to teach other new and burgeoning watercolor artists different tips and tricks, and just to make watercolor a little bit more approachable and welcoming, because I know that it can be a pretty intimidating medium for a lot of people. So without further ado, make sure you are subscribed to my channel, like, comment, go check out part 1 if you haven't already, and let's go ahead and finish up these beautiful buttercups. At this point, your page should be dry or mostly dry and mostly covered in yellow, because we've done that first initial wash with wet on wet, and then we've been coming in with wet on wet paint to start creating shapes. And as things are drying, we are getting a little closer to using that wet on dry kind of technique. So at this point, I can start coming in and really shaping very specific flowers with my brush here. Now the shapes that I lay down are going to have that more specific wet on dry look that we can create, where we have more control over the shapes and can really start to bring forward those flowers that are in the foreground. And I'm kind of leaving a little space in the center so that I can add a little more detailing in the center of these flowers. And I'm gonna make some of them maybe kind of sideways. I don't want them all just kind of facing me with all 5 petals showing. Some of them I want to be a little bit different. So I'm just gonna be adding some slightly different shapes of petals in here as well, so that I get a little bit more diversity amongst the look of these buttercups here. And if while you're doing this, you realize, you know what, I wish I had like a looser one over here, or maybe I want another loose one up here, just get more water on your brush and just kind of come in and shape that, create it yourself. Or if you don't like that there's more white space in an area, you can just kind of come in and start filling that in rather easily, even though you're now doing the more wet on dry. And I'm also going to come in with just this lighter yellow. I'm just kind of filling in the background a little bit more. And I'm keeping in mind that I still have to add the green, and that's going to certainly take up some of the space. And then I will also, of course, be adding the center parts of the flower. So while they're still wet-ish, I'm going to come in with an orange yellow, just by adding orange to my yellow. For the center. The center in a buttercup obviously is the same color as what's around it, but that would be kind of tricky to do in this specific instance, because everything around it is also that color. And I'm just coming in and I'm just tapping the very tip of my brush into the center. And so that way it is going to be pulled out into the petals around it, but it's still getting that darker center area to kind of help it have a bit of an accent to it and help it pop a little. The more background flowers won't have that. So I accidentally just added a center to some of these background flowers, so I'm actually just gonna go in and pull up some of that paint. It's okay if it's in there. I just don't want it to be as strong as it is with these paints in the foreground, or these flowers in the foreground. Now, while those leaves and while those petals are drying, I'm going to come in and start putting in my leaves. And I'm going to come in and barely touch it on the base of the flower if it's facing the side like this one, so that it kind of goes into the flower but doesn't overwhelm it. And then I'm just going to be careful not to bring my stems like directly over a really wet petal, because if I did that, it would just really muddy it up, like here. So don't do that. For the ones that are not facing off to the side, I'm not touching it to the petals of the flower because I don't want them to mix that way. And I also want to be sure with Buttercup that I am adding some stems coming off from each other. They don't all have their own individual stem, right? They kind of branch off each other in different areas. So I don't want to just bring down a stem for every single one of them. I want to make sure that they're branching off of, you know, like here, they're all kind of branching off each other. Now you won't always necessarily see or be able to show where each one is branching off to, so don't stress over where all of these stems are going and if they have a home or not, if they have an ending anywhere. Yeah, you don't really have to stress over that because it's, you know, it's all just kind of mixed together, especially with this style. So I would not worry about that at all. I'm also going to start adding these little buds that you see here of the buttercups before they've bloomed, which is just kind of these little round blobs. And as I'm adding detail, if I want it to be more specific and more detailed, I'm going to bring in more pigment onto my brush. If I want it to be less detailed, say it's in this more like ethereal area, I'm gonna make sure that I have enough water around it or on my brush to help it spread out as it needs to. All right, I am also at this point going to be coming in and adding some leaves. The leaves on these sweet little buttercups are just those tiny little leaves that we've done 100 times before at this point. And they're just really small. So they're kind of like that shape, or, you know, small like these. And they have kind of a pointy end. So I'm going to, you know, kind of get into the body of the leaf faster, and so that I can get that pointy end in there without making my leaf really big. And then some of the leaves are not just those pointy ones, but they kind of branch off of each other. So they have these little kind of twiggy ones coming off where it branches, and then near the base of the buttercup, it has a longer leaf coming off, so it'll be kind of a whole bunch of these kind of long strokes kind of added together. And that's where you can really start to fill your page. You can really start to fill it in with these leaves. And don't be afraid of going over on top of the flowers that you've already laid down with leaves or with other flowers, because one, it's translucent, so you'll see a little bit of it behind, and two, because that's kind of what you're creating here anyway, is this sort of mishmash, you know, eye candy of of color and shape and everything like that. Okay. Now at this point, I'm gonna let everything dry, because at this point, what I'm gonna do when I come back is add the center details and any kind of darkness to the leaves that I feel I wanna add to this, okay? So once you get to this point, go ahead and let it dry, and we'll meet back here to do the final details. All right, so I let it dry completely, and then I finished my painting thinking I was recording it, and I did not actually record it. So I'm gonna talk you through what I did at the end here. All I did since the last time we saw this was I added a little bit more of an orange yellow. In this case, I got rather orange, so they're much more orange buttercups than you might see in the wild. So I added, just by doing little dots of orange into the centers, and just by adding little orange areas around each petal that I wanted to have be more in the forefront. I then went in with a darker green, just by adding some Payne's gray to the green I last used, and just came in and defined some of these lines, some areas that were a little muddier. I made sure I could put a darker line on top of to really define what is actually in the front, so the muddy part gets kind of pushed to the background and it doesn't distract the eye. And then after I added those additional petals and leaves, I then went in with that dark green and I did a couple little dots in the center of the flowers, while the orangey yellow dots in the center were still wet in there, just so it could kind of combine together. What I mean by little dots is I went into the center of the flower. I just quite literally did some little dots into the center, and then just made little marks like this into each of the petals. And then when I was done with the green, I just came in and added some green dots in there as well. So you can see the green mixes with the golden center or the orange center, creating a little bit more depth. And then at this point, I would just let it dry. I might come back and add some more, maybe after leaving it for a couple of days. But I think if I keep adding more to it now, it's just gonna get out of control. So it's always good to know when to stop, right? So you can see, you can create similar but very different kind of look or feel or pattern on the page. And yeah, just kind of experiment and have fun with adding all of these incredibly different layers, just one on top of the other on top of the other. And you can just really see how much density and depth you can get by combining that wet on wet and wet on dry technique. And there we have it, the whole Buttercup, part 1 and part 2. And I hope you guys are feeling really proud of what you've created. I hope you're feeling like you have a better grasp and understanding of different techniques with approaching watercolor and how, you know, really approachable it can be. And of course, you know, the more you practice, the better you're gonna get over the years. And I'm just really happy to have you here in class. Couple things. One, of course, if you liked this tutorial, go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel, like it, comment, share it with your friends. Of course, anything helps to support me as an artist, as I also support you as artists as well. The other thing is, if you are interested in getting to know more about these techniques and to see the 4 other flowers, including aster and tea rose and a whole bunch of other fun things, as well as really going in depth with a bunch of different techniques before we practice them through these flowers, you can go ahead and check out my full class called Exploring Watercolor It is on my Skillshare channel, and I've linked it below in the caption of this video here. This video, the part 1 and part 2 of Buttercups, is actually part of that class. It's just one small part of a class where we go over a bunch of different beginner watercolor techniques and then work on these techniques through 5 different flowers together in a very beginner-friendly way. So I would love to have you over there in class too. If you're not a Skillshare member, the link below gives you access for 1 month free, 1 or 2 months, I forget what we're doing now, but gives you access to watch it for free, and I hope to see you there as well. Otherwise, make sure you like and subscribe, and I'll see you in our next tutorial.